All right, Unity of Fredericksburg. Hello. God bless each and every one of you. Reverend Juan Toro blessing you once again. Thank you for allowing me to be with you today. And today we are talking about a forgiving spirit. You remember the old couple that was having that discussion, and things were getting a little tense, and she brought up an incident from way in the past, where they'd had some trouble. And he says to her, I thought you had forgiven and forgotten. And she says, I have forgiven and forgotten, but I wanted you to remember that I had forgiven and forgotten. Oh yes, we're talking about forgiveness again. And in the news this week was Pope Francis. And he was in the news because he had undertaken a penitential pilgrimage. Never heard of such a thing. A penitential pilgrimage to Canada. And he declared that the main intention of his trip was to meet with the indigenous peoples there who had suffered at the hands of priests and missionaries and Catholic zealots who, in their treatment of the indigenous people, had treated them terribly. All kinds of wrongs, and he in different speeches he said things like, I'm deeply sorry, this was a disastrous error, I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the indigenous peoples. Well, I really enjoyed that. I found that to be a very good move on the part of the Pope and the part of the Catholic Church. And of course, it helps us with our forgiveness message today. The church is wanting to move forward. I happen to work in an organization that is sponsored by the Archdiocese here of New York City. And, we're a heavily Catholic organization, even though, all people of all faiths are admitted and so forth. But because we're part of that, we've been, as a pastoral care department, we've been interviewed for an upcoming synod, S-Y-N-O-D, coming up next year, 2023, where the Catholic Church is bringing in bishops, and the Pope has declared that he would like input not only from Catholics, but from the entire population of the world, to give them a vision about the future for the Catholic Church, what kind of vision they could embody. And when we had that meeting and they were asking us a series of questions, the first thing I said is, just like any visualization exercise, if we're going to envision a brighter future, we need to first begin by recognizing and forgiving the past mistakes, errors, or as the Pope said, the disastrous errors. So needed to begin with forgiveness. You remember Jesus told us that if you're going to come to the temple and pray and you got something against your brother, go first and make amends, make peace with your brother, and then come and pray. Right? This is the importance of forgiveness. It's going to get in the way of us being able to be truly able to visualize and chart a clear path forward. And so we want to understand the ways in which forgiveness works. And I found a Bible passage which really excited me because, as you'll see in this message, the parable that Jesus tells really supports what we read about in the Course in Miracles. And I'll explain that to you as the message goes on. Okay? So the passage is from Matthew 18:21-35. And it's the famous beginning. Then Peter came to Jesus and said, Lord, if my brother or sister sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. In other words, a whole bunch. He says, for this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, the Lord ordered him to be sold together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and the payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before the king and said to him, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." Out of pity for him, the Lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon the one fellow slave who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, "Pay me what you owe." Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you." But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he could pay the debt. And when the fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed. And they went and reported to their Lord all that had taken place. And then his Lord summoned him and said to him, "You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me." And in anger, his Lord handed him over to the torturers until he would pay his debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or your sister from your heart. Wow. These are strong words from Jesus. Jesus is making no bones about the importance of forgiveness, telling us that story. And what's interesting about this story is that he likens it to the kingdom of God, right? And the kingdom of God is that state of consciousness where we can find the full realization of self, the one presence, the one power, the non-duality, etc., etc. And so we need to consider this idea of forgiveness once again today. What's interesting about the story is that the slave, the king was, balancing his books, and he sees this one slave who had owed him 10,000 talents. Now we don't know exactly how much a talent is worth, but it's said to be worth quite a bit of money. And he owed him 10,000 of those, right? So it was a lot of money, it was significant. And the king finds a way to forgive him the debt and let him go, which is the kind of consciousness that we're looking to establish today here in this message, right? And then the slave goes out and finds somebody who owes him 100 denarii. 100 denarii is a lot less, like $50, a few dollars, whatever. The other slave can't pay, begs, for patience, but the guy says no way, has him by the throat, throws him in jail. The king sees this, says, bam, because you have not forgiven, I'm going to throw you in jail and torture you until you pay me the debt, right? So these are the consequences that Jesus is telling us we have of not paying our debt and not forgiving, excuse me. So let's explore this a little bit, right? Now, as we bring up the topic of forgiveness, I don't know about you, but we've heard forgiveness one time and over time, and there's not a year that goes by when we don't hear at least a couple forgiveness messages. And sometimes we get a little tired of it, but it is such an important thing because every day I have opportunities for forgiveness, and I'm guessing that you do too. Maybe they're small things, maybe they're larger things, but we tend to accumulate these things. Worse yet, some of us may even deny that we really need to forgive. As we think back about our parents, for example, some of us may say, well, I've had my disappointments, and at times I was angry with my parents, but, it hasn't really affected me in the way I relate to people, right? It hasn't affected my relationships or anything like that. And if you haven't done some good forgiveness work with your parents, the opportunity is there because there's probably something deeper going on, right? I love this reading from Hebrews, another scripture for you. It says, "See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and through it may become defiled." Talks about a root right? A root of unforgiveness, and that's a root of bitterness, of anger. And that root is deeply set within us. And, maybe we can deal with the superficial things, but have we gotten into the deeper sense, right? And so, we think about a situation where maybe you were hurt, and I was hurt by that person, but, it really hasn't affected me all that much. I can relate to people all pretty well. And my suggestion, check in with that. There may be some low-grade fever going on underneath, which is maybe causing some self-pity, and maybe you find yourself mistreating others, and all because you really haven't dealt and faced with the forgiveness issues within you. Not forgiving is a very serious thing for us. One of the gifts that we have in life is our ability to be able to see what it is that we and go about the process of doing it. And so that's why the story of the king, to me, is so important. And of course, he shows us what not forgiving, the consequences of not forgiving can be. The consequences, obviously, the slave is thrown in jail, but we're tormented by this. We're going to be miserable. We're going to feel like we're in a prison. We're going to feel like we can't really live a free life. And we sometimes ask ourselves the question, why is that? Well, maybe it has to do with our forgiveness. Now, what's interesting here in this story, the king does three things which are important for us to identify, and that's what we're going to see how they relate with the Course in Miracles, as I mentioned. And the three things that the king does is he has pity on the slave, he cancels the debt, and he lets him go. We're sort of dissecting what happened in the story. But there are three important parts. We're going to consider them, not in that order. We're going to start with canceling the debt first. Now, this, we've titled the message today, A Forgiving Spirit. And for a forgiving spirit, one of the most important things we need to do is cancel the debt. So basically what happens? What happens is that when somebody does something to us, we think about getting back, revenge. We're angered by what happened, and we're going to see how we're going to make that person emotionally pay, right? We're going to have them pay. The thing is that when we set up this kind of scenario, we become indebted to them. They owe us, you see. They owe us an apology. They owe us amends. They owe us. And so they are indebted to us. Now, that is a terrible place to be. To have that emotional debt with somebody. The emotional debt will weigh on you, right? Until you feel that debt is paid. That debt has got to be paid down somehow, right? Somebody does something to you, there's an imbalance there, and you feel something's got to be done, right? We got to pay down this debt. And the first place we go to get paid is the other person. We want them to pay it down. The problem is that when we do that, they become indebted to us, or we believe they're indebted to us, locks us into a very terrible space. We think of ways, if they're not coming through with the forgiveness or the justice or the amends that we want, we think of ways maybe to harm them. Maybe we want to insult them. Maybe we're going to be colder to them. Maybe we're going to be harsh to them. Maybe we withdraw our friendship. We're going to try to hurt them in some way professionally. We're going to direct ways to kind of trip them up in life, whatever that may be, ruin their reputation. Maybe indirect ways. We find ways of manipulating this. Or maybe we try to take the fictitious high road. And we say, I'm not going to do anything to that person because I'm they're beneath me, right? Nah, not worth it. They're the scum of the earth. No, don't need. But basically, we want to hurt them. Let's just admit that to ourselves. We want them to feel the same kind of pain that we felt, right? Why do we want that? Well, it's really kind of crazy, but we believe that in seeing them have pain, it's going to alleviate our pain. It's a strange, it's a strange thing. Nelson Mandela said, to be angry and bitter is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. Right? You can drink the poison and you're thinking they're going to die, but it's hurting you. And so we admit that we believe somehow that it's going to make us feel good. The problem is, it doesn't, right? It doesn't. The more we inflict the pain, the more we become like the perpetrator that did that to us. We begin to melt into likeness with them. We believe that they owe us, and now we're thinking, we're scheming, we're mal-wishing, maybe we're bad speaking, bad mouthing these people, right? And so we become just like them. And now, the cycle continues, and inside, that root of bitterness is getting stronger. And that bitterness is just going to manifest in our life. I remember once upon a time, we ministry in Costa Rica, we had a small church, and across the street was a family whose children wanted to come to our children's program on Sundays. They seemed to like what they saw, and they wanted to join us. And, it was a nice opportunity, but their parents didn't let them. One day I decided to knock on their door and I said to them, let your kids come, and we'll take care of them. We'll go pick them up. We'll walk them across the street. We won't let them go by themselves. We'll make sure that they're taken care of. We'll have the program, and then we'll return them to you again, right? And the man got so angry, and he says, absolutely not. He says, my father forced me to go to church all my life, and I'm not going to let my kids or my grandkids go to church. Oh, that was a surprise to me, right? And later on, I thought about it, and I said, this man, he's got an issue with his father that he hasn't resolved, and so his father is still having an influence on him, which is now affecting his children. He's not thinking so much of his children; he's thinking of his relationship with his father, which is affecting his children. And that's the way these things can work, right? That's the way these things can work. And so, as we think about paying down this debt, something has happened, we got to pay it down. We got two options. One, they're going to pay it down by us hurting them, right? In one way or another. Or the second option, the option that the king takes, is that we're going to pay it down. And what does that mean? We're going to pay it down ourselves. The king shows us how it's possible for us to cancel the debt. Now, I do want to say something very clearly, just a little aside here. If something has happened legally and you feel that you need to take some legal action, right, against somebody, well, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, okay? Go ahead and take the steps that you need to take that are all within the law of the land. No problem. But what consciousness are you doing it in is the question. If you're doing it as revenge, full of resentment, anger, they're paying the debt down, that's the wrong consciousness, because again, you're indebting yourself to them, and you're only going to perpetuate. You're not going to be free. You're going to put yourself in that prison. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to get into the Course in Miracles idea in just a moment, but when we think of lashing out, of hurting somebody, speaking harshly, rumors, whatever, we don't do it. Maybe we think about it, but we choose the high path. We choose not to speak. If we find ourselves thinking badly of the person, we take some efforts to find a way for compassion, which is actually the next step that the king has. He has pity on this fellow. He had compassion. And like I said, this is important because the debt was a big debt. 10,000 denarii is a lot of money, right? And so in that money, what we find is that the king had to find a way to join with this individual. Now, oftentimes, when we are hurt by somebody, we tend to make a caricature of them. Maybe they lied to us, okay? And so in lying to us, we set up a caricature in which this person now becomes the liar. A very just two-dimensional person, liar there. And we feel very comfortable in our judgment and our condemnation of them. Nevertheless, if we look at ourselves, we sometimes say, well, you know, yeah, maybe I've lied a few times, but I got a lot of positive things too. When we look at ourselves, we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. You know, we see ourselves more three-dimensional, more complex being. Yeah, I have these positive and I have these negatives, and so forth. So when we look upon our brother and sister, we need to look for a way to get beyond the caricature and find ourselves joining with them. You know, you are me and I am you, that kind of consciousness. The whole person needs to be seen because we're complex, they're complex, right? You can say, well, I'm weak, I'm confused, I'm a mixture of good and evil, and so is the other, right? And there's going to be freedom in that from the anger that you're harboring within you. When you find compassion for the other, just like the king is teaching us, it helps us alleviate that anger. It stills it. It quiets it. That root of bitterness isn't so strong. And then finally, the king lets it go, right? He lets it go. He lets the guy go free, right? He's going to take care of paying the debt. He's going to take that upon himself. And just like we've been talking about, we're going to assume we're going to pay it down. And so we let the other go so that they can, you know, find the peace and the joy and all the whole expression that they are. And so we think about the commonalities, we think about the joy in that. And so the king did these three things: had pity, canceled the debt, and also let the guy go. Now, how does this relate to the Course in Miracles? The Course in Miracles is this pretty thick book, and its main thrust is forgiveness. That's the main issue within the Course in Miracles. And in the Course in Miracles, they have a 3-step forgiveness process, which is our how-to for this message today. Okay? So, in the Course in Miracles forgiveness process, we do 2 parts, and 1 part is done for us. 3 parts, we do 2, and 1 is done for us. It's a beautiful process. And here's how it goes. When somebody does something to us, we go within ourselves, the other is left out, and we check in with our emotions. And we check in with what has happened. Let's again suppose that somebody has lied to us, betrayed our trust, okay? Lied to us in some way. And we feel that emotion, and we ask ourselves, has there ever been a time where I've lied? And, you know, probably your answer is going to be yes. Now, maybe there's a sense of degrees. Forget about the degrees. There's no sense of gradation in the forgiveness work. Even if you'd lied a little white lie, and somebody's giving you this big, huge lie, it's the same energy. So the same energy that came from this other individual is within you. And you're invited to recognize the liar in you, the thief, the weakness, the degenerate, right? The addict, whatever it is. Find it within you. Now, when we go inside and we find that, that's not a very pleasant feeling. We don't like it. We resist it. We fight it. But it's important. And we allow that feeling to be within us. That's the first part of the forgiveness process of the Course in Miracles. Now, the second part is that when we see that aspect of ourselves, that's going to produce some guilt. I want you to be aware of the guilt, feel the guilt, allow the guilt to have all the space inside that it needs. And then the second step is that we recognize that we've made a decision in favor of that guilt. That's akin to having the other pay the debt down, you see. We choose to seek revenge. We're doing, we're making a decision. But we're not a decision for them, we're doing it for ourselves. We're making a decision to feel guilty. In other words, to harm ourselves. Now, if feeling guilty feels bad, the second one feels even worse, because you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, why would I ever do something as stupid as that? Why would I hurt myself with that? And so the third part of the Course in Miracles, which is done for us, is asking for help. We ask for help from God. We say, dear God, I have this situation with this person. I realize that through compassion, again, having pity, the king having pity, having compassion, I see the same energy within them that I have within myself. I recognize that. Furthermore, that's produced some guilt, and I'm realizing that I've made a decision for that guilt, in favor of that guilt. I wanted them to pay it down. But dear God, I'd like to make a new decision right now. I'd like to surrender, turn over this decision for guilt in favor of your love, in favor of your peace and your joy. So please help me release that in favor of receiving your love. Now, what I like to do is to join my breathing with this kind of prayer. So I breathe in through the nose God's love, and I exhale my guilt, my liar, all my negativity. Just very gently, very naturally. But with every breath is a cleansing breath. And eventually the transformation, the inner transformation, begins to happen. And you know when it's complete, when, after a while you can actually feel it within the body. You know it's complete when you can look at the person, the perpetrator, and you can know that the same energy that's in you is in them. That really what they did was call for love. The same call for love that you have. When you ask God for God's love, you're calling for love. You're calling for that love. They had the same call. That's why they did what they did. And so you and he and she are absolutely one. And when you see that oneness and you feel it, then you let it go. Pity, cancel the debt, let it go. Recognize the same energy in them as in you, produce the guilt. Recognize that you have made a decision in favor of that guilt. Ask for God's help. Ask for the call for love. Fill yourself with that love. Look out onto that person, into the world, and see that all of this negativity is all about a call for love. Reverend Juan Enrique Toro, blessing you, wishing for all of us, wanting for all of us, a forgiving spirit. God bless you. I love each and every one of you.